Hey, welcome. Today we are diving into a really powerful spiritual take on the Israelites' time in the wilderness. Specifically, we're going to unpack four key events from chapters 16 through 19 of the book of Numbers, looking at them through the author's eyes as these essential lessons in a sort of spiritual boot camp. So, let's kick things off with a question that really gets to the heart of this whole thing. How is it possible that our biggest, most spectacular failures can actually turn into our most important lessons? The author we're following here makes a compelling case that what looks like one disaster after another was actually a carefully designed curriculum for the soul. All right, here's our game plan. First, we'll look at this idea of the wilderness as a kind of classroom. Then, we're going to explore three big virtues that were forged in the fire of failure: faithfulness, obedience, and gentleness. And then we'll wrap it all up by seeing how this all leads to recognizing what the author calls a divine resurrected life. Okay, so the first big idea the author wants us to grab onto is this: that 40-year wandering, it wasn't just a penalty, It was a divine training ground, an intense hands-on classroom for building spiritual character. So in this view, every single major mess-up the Israelites had was actually a necessary test. Each crisis was allowed to happen to expose a deep spiritual weakness, and then, in its place, establish a core virtue. It's a really different way to look at these ancient stories, isn't it? So just to get our bearings, let's take a look at the map. The journey starts down in Egypt, winds through the Sinai wilderness, and brings them right up to this spot, Kadesh-barnea, literally on the doorstep of the Promised Land. And this place, well, this is where the first huge lesson unfolds. And that brings us to lesson number 1. It all kicks off with a massive crisis of faith, right there at the border of their final destination. And this one moment, wow, it would go on to define the next 40 years of their lives. So what went down? Well, 12 spies are sent in to check out the land. 10 of them come back absolutely terrified, talking about giants and massive walled cities. And that fear, it just spread like wildfire. It totally crushed the people's trust in God's promise, and they rebelled, flat out refusing to go in. Now, here's how the author breaks this down. The problem wasn't really the giants, it was unbelief. The people looked and saw giant obstacles instead of a giant promise. So the lesson had to be about establishing faithfulness. That entire generation, the one that refused to trust, had to pass away to make room for a new one that would be defined by faith. This quote from the author just nails it. The 40 years of wandering wasn't just about killing time. It was an active, intentional process of purification. It was all designed to get rid of that spirit of unbelief and to forge a spirit of absolute faith. Okay, so after that intense lesson in faithfulness, another crisis flares up. But this time it comes from inside the camp. It's a direct challenge to leadership, and it's meant to teach the next crucial lesson: obedience. At the center of this firestorm is a guy named Korah. He gets 250 other leaders to join him, and they go right up to Moses and Aaron. And their argument, it sounds pretty good, right? Hey, the whole community is holy. But what was really happening underneath was a full-blown rebellion against the authority that God himself had put in place. The author is really clear on this point. This wasn't some political squabble. The real problem was rebellion, a deep spiritual attack on divine order. And so the lesson had to be about establishing obedience. It was about understanding that real spiritual life works inside a structure of God-given authority, not through just promoting yourself. And this quote, it just drives home how serious this was from the author's viewpoint. See, it's not about who's in charge, it's about a principle. To challenge God's appointed authority is to attack God's very order, which the author calls, and rightly so, a most serious matter. So you'd think, after seeing the ground literally open up and swallow the rebels, the people would have learned their lesson, right? Well, no. In fact, their reaction is what leads directly to the next test. This one is designed to establish the spirit of gentleness. So get this, the very next day, the entire community starts complaining and blaming Moses and Aaron, accusing them of killing the Lord's people. Their hearts are just so hard and their words are like poison. And in response to all this murmuring, a deadly plague just erupts and starts tearing through the camp. We're seeing the pattern again, right? The problem is murmuring, this hard, accusing spirit. But the author points us to the lesson hidden in the solution. Moses tells Aaron to grab his censer with incense, a symbol of prayer, and to run, literally run into the middle of the plague. Aaron stands right there between the living and the dead, and the plague stops. That action, that is the picture of the gentle spirit that needed to be established. This quote really connects all the dots for us. The people's hardness is put right up against Aaron's gentle, life-saving intervention. His response becomes the divine blueprint, showing that the only cure for a hard, accusatory spirit is a gentle, interceding one. So after all these crises, unbelief, rebellion, murmuring, God gives one final, undeniable sign. It's a miracle designed to shut down all the arguments for good and to show everyone the true nature of his chosen authority. Now this is really the climax of these chapters. God tells each of the 12 tribes to bring a dry, dead, wooden staff. Aaron's staff represents his tribe, and the author sees this budding rod as the ultimate symbol of resurrection life, a life that doesn't come from human effort or ambition, but one that miraculously springs forth out of death itself. I mean, just look at this progression. It's not just a tiny little green sprout. This dead stick goes through an entire life cycle in a single night. It buds, it blossoms, and then it produces fully ripe almonds. The author sees this as this amazing metaphor for true spiritual authority. It's not something you can grab or vote for. It's a dead thing that God alone brings to life and makes fruitful. And that's really the mic drop moment here. The budding rod isn't just another cool miracle. It's God's final, silent answer to everything. You just can't argue with resurrection, can you? It's the ultimate proof of divine choice, and it's meant to end all the human bickering about who should be in charge. Okay, let's pull it all together. The author has shown us a really clear spiritual progression, right? First, establishing faithfulness in the face of unbelief. Second, establishing obedience in the face of rebellion. Third, establishing gentleness to conquer a spirit of murmuring. And finally, recognizing divine life as the only true source of authority. So in the end, the author takes these epic historical failures and transforms them into a timeless roadmap for our own spiritual growth. That difficult journey through the desert becomes a pattern for what the author calls the journey of the soul's life. And that really brings us to our final thought. The author presents this journey not as dusty old history, but as a living, breathing pattern for us. So the question that leaves us with is this: if these are the steps, faithfulness, obedience, gentleness, and recognizing divine life, what's the next step on your journey?